Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world. The paths canon never walked. The choices that might have changed everything. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. The wizarding world operates under a comforting fiction. That Harry Potter is the boy who resisted the dark arts, a moral counterspell walking through a war-torn age. They are wrong. On the page and on the screen, he is framed as the reluctant Gryffindor hero who wins by love, loyalty, and refusal. Yet the text keeps betraying that story. This is the child who grows up in a cupboard, who meets magic not as wonder, but as escape, whose first great act is blowing up his aunt in a surge of uncontrolled rage. From the beginning, his power is fused to anger. That is not an accident. That is soul resonance. Canon asks us to applaud his defiance of rules as charming rebellion, sneaking to the third-floor corridor, stealing from Snape's stores, slipping under an invisibility cloak into the restricted section. These are framed as adventures. Look again, and they become a profile. A boy who learns very early that authority is negotiable, that boundaries bend if you push hard enough. A boy for whom Hogwarts is less a school and more a fortress with weak locks. By 5th year, the mask slips entirely. Harry casts the Cruciatus Curse, not once, but twice, and means it. He wields the Imperius successfully, with methodical certainty, to force another wizard's compliance. These are not childish hexes. They are war crimes in training, performed by the supposed moral center of the narrative. The question is not whether Harry could have turned dark. The evidence is already there. The question is why he did not. In this episode, we invert the assumption. We ask, what if Hogwarts itself quietly pushed him toward the dark arts? And he said yes. Not a sudden heel turn, not a melodramatic declaration of allegiance, but a hidden timeline running beneath the one we know, where the same scenes tilt a few degrees and never tilt back. In this timeline, the mirror of Erised is not just a tragic glimpse of family. It is a doorway, a portal to older magic, to whispers that explain how to anchor what you see in glass into the living world. The restricted section stops being a one-night prank and becomes a hunting ground, where a lonely first year returns again and again, chasing any page that promises control. A mentor in the shadows, Snape, a spectral author in a cursed diary, or a disembodied voice bound to a book, begins to interpret his pain for him, to insist that fear is a faster shield than love, that being tactically lethal is the only way to make sure no one you care about dies again. Tonight, we will track that divergence with precision, year by year, temptation by temptation, until 3 possible endgames emerge. A grey anti-hero who uses forbidden spells as surgical instruments, a rival Dark Lord who outgrows Voldemort, or a double agent who burns the serpent with its own venom. This is Harry, not as a symbol of resistance to the dark, but as a weapon being polished in the dark. A masterpiece to be molded. And it all begins in first year with a boy, a mirror, and a question he is finally willing to answer. What would you give up to make sure you never feel helpless again. Halloween 1981. Rewriting the first curse. Harry's answer to that question is not born in first year. It is written 10 years earlier in green light and ash. Halloween, the 31st of October, 1981. The canonical timeline insists on a simple miracle. A killing curse rebounds, a dark lord falls, and a baby lives with nothing more than a lightning-shaped scar and a legend he cannot yet carry. They are wrong. In this timeline, the curse does not merely fail. It drags, catches, and leaves behind a residue, an invisible filament welded into the soft machinery of an infant soul. Call it a soul resonance, not a shard of Voldemort's mind clawing for purchase, but a permanent tuning between Harry Potter and the raw mechanics of death magic itself. Where a Horcrux is crude anchoring, this is calibration. The killing curse, blood wards, sacrificial protections, and the old, nameless hexes that never made it into textbooks all leave impressions he will one day feel as clearly as pressure changes before a storm. The world thinks he survived a spell. In truth, his entire being has been rekeyed to its frequency. The nursery in Godric's Hollow, when the auras arrive, is a ruin of splintered wood and fading emerald afterglow. Yet it is Dumbledore who enters last and lingers longest. In the silence after catastrophe, he feels it. A faint hum, a wrongness that is not malevolent, merely unfinished, like a spell awaiting its final word. His wand moves through the air with methodical certainty, tracing threads of broken magic. Every pass circles back to the crib, to the child watching him with calm, uncomprehending eyes. In that moment, Dumbledore revises the story he will never tell. The boy who lived is not just a survivor, he is a conduit, a living interface with power that annihilated the greatest dark wizard of the age, and somehow did not shatter him. The decision at Privet Drive is reframed. Publicly, it is about love, blood, and Muggle obscurity. Privately, it is quarantine. Little Whinging will be the unremarkable fortress in which a potential weapon is stored, far from wands, from law, from anyone who might learn to play him like an instrument. Because others would. In this world of fractured loyalties and unfinished wars, there are minds who would look at Harry and see not a child, but a masterpiece to be molded. A boy who can stand inside the blast radius of death magic and remain coherent is by definition tactically lethal material. To some, he is a bomb that must never be armed. To others, he is a new template for dark wizardry, not madness and decay, but stability under impossible strain. From the moment he is left on the Dursleys' doorstep, wrapped in a blanket and prophecy, Harry is not just a boy with a scar, he is a tuning fork for every forbidden spell in Britain, humming faintly beneath suburban streetlights, waiting for the right frequency to wake him. And when Hogwarts finally calls, the castle's oldest shadows will answer back. One of them will reach him first. Cupboards, bruises, and the perfect vessel. The shadow that reaches him first isn't robed, ancient, or wand-wielding. It wears a mustache, a too-tight collar, and the authority of a man who knows no one will ever challenge him over a cupboard under the stairs. Clinically, Harry's childhood is not just unpleasant. It is a controlled experiment in learned helplessness, chronic humiliation at the breakfast table, deprivation dressed up as discipline. and the low-grade, ever-present fear of Vernon's next outburst compress a child's psyche into something sharp. Over years, the lesson is repeated with methodical certainty. You have no power, no voice, no safe witness. A different child might break. Harry does something more dangerous. He begins to crave an end to the imbalance. Not happiness, not even love, control. In this timeline, every slammed door and jeering chorus of freak does more than bruise skin. It vibrates that buried soul resonance lodged behind his scar. Canon remembers the hair regrowing after Petunia's ill-advised haircut as a whimsical accident. They are wrong. Here, the magic is not playful. It is pressurized. A plate Dudley hurls at his head does not miss. It shatters mid-air, like glass crushed in an invisible fist. The bars on his window rust overnight, bolts weeping orange as if something inside the metal has decided it will not be complicit. Each incident is small enough to be dismissed, yet precise enough to feel like intent. A weapon being polished in the dark. To survive, Harry learns a primitive occlumency long before Snape ever snarls the word. He reads Vernon's footsteps, the way an unspeakable might read runes, mapping which creak means move now, and which means freeze and erase your expression. Emotion becomes contraband. He files anger away, buries shame under practiced blankness, and constructs an internal fortress where the Dursleys cannot reach. The byproduct is chilling. A child who can experience violent, defensive magic and then calmly pretend nothing happened while passing the salt. That is the psychological architecture of future compromise. When the dark arts later offer him results, swift, asymmetric, tactically lethal, he will already know how to compartmentalize the guilt. Harry's first fantasy of power is not a stadium chanting his name or a gleaming firebolt slicing alpine air. It is silence. The television off, Dudley's whine cut mid-syllable, Vernon's face arrested in a slack, animal fear as some invisible pressure tightens around his throat, and then stops. Not murder, just the absolute, unquestioned ability to make pain cease on command. The dark arts, by design, promise precisely this: immediate obedience from a world that has never listened. Pattern interrupt. Imagine the sorting hat lowered over that mind and whispering, Gryffindor. In the Slytherin timeline we are tracing, Hogwarts will not meet a wide-eyed innocent dazzled by floating candles. It will receive a starved survivor who has spent a decade rehearsing, in secret, what it would feel like to be the one person in the room no one can safely hurt. When the castle finally offers him real power, charms, curses, forbidden corridors, a restricted section humming with resonance, it will not be awakening magic. It will be handing vocabulary to urges that already know exactly what they want, and one particular shadow in those corridors will recognize him as a masterpiece to be molded. The letter, the hut, and the first whisper of power. That shadow does not begin at Hogwarts. It begins with an envelope in the stale, overbright kitchen of Privet Drive. The first letter is not merely ink on parchment. It is an instrument pressed against Harry's soul resonance, testing pitch and strain. Each subsequent letter is an escalation. The magic woven into the parchment, brushing against the half-dormant wards like fingers along a cracked dam. The Dursleys think they are fleeing paper. They are wrong. What hounds them is pressure building inside a boy who has never been allowed to be dangerous. As Vernon drives them out over the black water, the storm is not a coincidence. In this timeline, the wards around Harry are so frayed by years of fear and humiliation that the letter's compulsion spells hook directly into him. Dragging at his magic with tidal insistence, the wind claws at the hut on the rock, the sea slams itself against stone, and inside Harry something answers. An answering surge, a low, dark resonance that feels alarmingly like being seen. The world calls it Hogwarts calling. It is, in truth, the first serious attempt anyone has made to claim him. When the door crashes inward at midnight, Hagrid arrives not as a gentle guide, but as the first authority figure to weaponize Harry's anger for him. The pink umbrella, ridiculous in silhouette, carries the memory of a snapped wand and the promise of barely contained violence when Hagrid swishes it and gives Dudley a pig's tail. The room smells of singed air and petty vengeance. He's not worth it, Hagrid growls. But the message that lodges is different. Magic can answer humiliation with transformation. Power can rewrite the body of the boy who mocked you. Harry laughs, and then he doesn't. The silence afterward is heavy. Somewhere, a weapon being polished in the dark takes its first glint of light. The revelation of his parents' deaths is the next incision. Until now, death has been an absence, a vague car crash story used to shut down questions. Hagrid replaces it with murder, with a single spell that ended 2 lives and failed at a 3rd. The narrative is simple, almost soothing in its clarity. There is a curse that kills, there is a man who used it, and there is Harry who survived. The concept of the killing curse is planted like a seed, with no name yet, but a clear function: death, on command, from a wand in a human hand. When Hagrid speaks Voldemort's name, the hut's air changes temperature. The storm outside seems to hesitate. Harry's scar tightens, not with pain exactly, but with the sensation of a door in his own magic being brushed from the other side. In this moment, Voldemort is not just a label, it is a key phrase, a pattern that fits the lock of his soul resonance with unnerving precision. The Slytherin timeline does not need Bellatrix to tell Harry he is linked to the dark. His own body informs him. By dawn, as the boat cuts through the dark water toward the mainland, and then, later, toward Hogwarts across its black lake, Harry is not simply crossing into a new world. He is being ferried toward the only fortress on Earth dense enough in magic to feed that half-woken resonance, to test whether this boy will bend toward light or shadow. And somewhere in those towers and corridors, someone is already waiting, with methodical certainty, to decide which way he breaks. Year 1, the mirror, the restricted section, and the first forbidden lesson. He steps off the boat as a wide-eyed first year. The staff and students see only another orphan folded into Hogwarts' stone embrace. They are wrong. In this timeline, the castle does not merely welcome Harry Potter. It answers him. The proof arrives on a silent, snow-drowned Christmas night. The common rooms have emptied into holiday warmth. The corridors have thinned to echoes and drafts. Wrapped in his father's invisibility cloak, Harry moves through that silence with the awkward caution of a child and the unconscious poise of a weapon being polished in the dark. As he slips into the library, The air itself seems to thicken, the shadows densest around the iron-gated mouth of the restricted section. There, his soul resonance hums. It is not sentimental nostalgia that pulls at him, but a low, magnetic awareness. Leather spines, bound in dragonhide. Others in something older and less easily named, covers that seem to tense as he passes, as if the books are holding their breath. The Slytherin timeline is often described as a political divergence. In reality, it begins here, in the way his magic leans toward shelves. No 11-year-old should even sense. Canon remembers this night for a miscast spell and a screaming book. In this world, the real trespass waits beyond the library. Fleeing Filch and Mrs. Norris, Harry stumbles into the unused classroom, into the cold, into the mirror of Erised. But the glass is not alone. Wedged behind its frame, invisible to ordinary sight and wards, lies a thin, iron-clasped volume whose protections are woven into the mirror's enchantment. It is a cursed grimoire that only responds to those marked by death magic. When Harry's fingers brush the mirror's edge, the wards taste what lives in his scar. They recognize the residue of the killing curse, the fracture in his soul, the echo of a murdered Dark Lord. The book does not open in the room. It opens in the reflection. A second Harry, framed in silver, watches his own hands receive a volume that is not physically there, its title shifting, like ink in water. His first lesson is not a spell but a theory, unspooling in his mind, as if remembered rather than read. Blood is a conduit, not merely a symbol. Intent is a blade that sharpens or dulls any incantation. Fear, properly harnessed, is fuel, not weakness. The book's voice is precise, almost academic, insisting that darkness is neutral, a scalpel that only becomes evil in clumsy hands. It flatters, with methodical certainty, sketching Harry as a masterpiece to be moulded, uniquely disciplined, uniquely worthy to wield such power without falling. This secret vocabulary follows him to the underground chamber months later. When he touches Quirrell's skin, the canon story says he burns him with love. Here, Harry also feels the parasitic lattice saturating Quirrell's body, a second presence threaded through nerves and marrow, drinking him dry. The wrongness is not abstract. It is tactile, a rival current scraping against his own, an intrusion that offends the nascent authority in his magic. Quirrell dies, but the lesson does not. When term resumes, Harry returns to classes outwardly unchanged, small, awkward, still learning which staircase moves when. Yet defense against the dark arts now feels like children's games, wooden swords waved where he has glimpsed the blueprints for war. He carries, alone, a private lexicon, blood, intent, fear, neutrality, that makes every flippant warning about the dark arts ring hollow. And somewhere behind the glass, the unseen book waits for him to come back and turn the next page. Forging the framework, how dark magic rewrites Harry's education. Harry adapts. Hogwarts believes it is educating a late-arriving transfer, a talented but unremarkable third year catching up on missed basics. They are wrong. In this timeline, the castle is merely providing raw material, techniques, incantations, historical precedents, while the true curriculum is being written elsewhere, in ink the staff will never see. By day, he is exemplary, Flitwick's charms lessons become precise laboratories where Harry files away wand motions, syllabic stresses, and the invisible scaffolding of intent. Lumos, Leviosa, Shield charms. Each is recorded not as a spell, but as a pattern. At night, when the common room sinks into green-tinged silence, he reopens the grimoire in his mind, laying its dark schematics over what he learned, aligning standard matrices with their predatory reflections. A disarming charm is reinterpreted as controlled severance, a stunning spell as a calibrated neural impact that could, if pushed, become permanent. McGonagall sees a disciplined transfiguration student. The grimoire sees a future architect of metamorphic curses. When she demonstrates turning a desk into a pig, Harry is less interested in the spectacle than in the transitional instability, the fraction of a second where wood is no longer wood and flesh is not yet flesh. The book has diagrams for that interval. It whispers of forms that never complete, of bodies arrested mid-change as living prisons. He does not practice them, yet, but he maps the possibility, filing it into an inner vault. Defense against the dark arts becomes the axis where both worlds meet. Canon insists Harry has a knack for the subject. The Slytherin timeline reframes that talent as soul resonance, a capacity to feel the internal geometry of curses as if they were chords struck inside his own nerves. In the official syllabus, this makes him preternaturally good at recognizing and blocking hostile magic. In his private syllabus, it makes reverse engineering trivial. He listens to the cadence of a jinx, senses which intention node carries the malice, and imagines what happens if that node is amplified instead of dampened. To manage this double life, he begins constructing disciplines. Proto-occlumency appears not as an esoteric art, but as emotional compartmentalization weaponized. Anger is folded into a sealed chamber. Fear is compressed into a razor-thin line that sharpens focus instead of shattering it. His mind becomes a fortress, diagrammed with methodical certainty, outer walls for teachers and friends, plausible emotions and schoolboy anxieties, inner bastions where the grimoire's theories are tested, and buried vaults where the truly unspeakable applications are locked away. Each dark concept he masters is visualized as a new tower, a vantage point from which he can survey threats and, if necessary, strike first. Parseltongue, once a stigmatized curiosity, is reclassified as a discipline as well, an affinity for any magic that coils, constricts, or infiltrates through narrow channels. Binding wards, constriction hexes, serpentine tracking charms, all resonate along the same mental frequency as hissed command. Even etiquette, drilled into him in alpine salons and pureblood parlors, is redeployed as a weapon. The art of reading microflinches, of modulating deference and insolence to conceal true intent, of wrapping hostility in silk. The pattern seems dangerously clear. Then, a quiet interruption. During an otherwise ordinary evening in the library, he watches a Hufflepuff prefect gently redirect a panicking first year away from the restricted section, invoking rules with earnest conviction. For a heartbeat, Harry studies them as if they are a new magical species. The book and his own history have already taught him that rules are for the powerless, that real sovereignty comes from understanding the full spectrum of magic and choosing when to cross lines. Not from pretending the lines do not exist. Hogwarts thinks it is taming him with routine and homework. In reality, every assignment is being fed into a deeper engine, a weapon being polished in the dark. And as the curriculum escalates, the Patronus, the chamber, the tournament, that engine will demand a field test. Year 2, the diary, the chamber, and a dark mirror named Tom. Year 2 does not begin with flying cars or house elf warnings in this timeline. It begins with a blank book that answers back. The Wizarding World assumes Tom Riddle's diary is a crude possession tool, a relic of teenage obsession and basilisk logistics. They are wrong. When Harry first bends over the torn leather in the quiet of a Hogwarts dormitory, the moment is not merely curious, it is seismic. He writes his name, watches the ink sink, and as the page drinks the letters, his soul resonance hums like a struck wire. There is a responding echo, an almost alpine clarity in the dark. Something in the diary recognizes him as kin, another child shaped by Hogwarts, by neglect, and by the promise that forbidden knowledge can rewrite a life. Tom does not open with exposition. He opens with listening. Their early conversations, written in that uncanny vanishing script, are structured like an interview conducted by a very patient predator. Tom asks about the Dursleys, not as a pitying adult, but as one survivor to another. He invites Harry to name the cupboard, the hunger, the humiliation, and then quietly reframes each memory as proof of endurance, as evidence that he was always a weapon being polished in the dark. From there, Tom presses on subtler fractures, the emptiness behind the boy who lived narrative, the way fame feels like a mask welded to the skin, the fear that his temper could one day hurt someone he actually values. In response, Tom offers elegantly phrased permissions. Darker methods, he writes, are not evil in themselves, only misapplied. Power is a neutral instrument. Morality lies in the objective. Use the sharper blade only when necessary. Ensure no witnesses. Maintain methodical certainty. The diary becomes a seminar in soul theory, long before Harry knows the word Horcrux. Tom sketches, in careful euphemism, how identity can be partitioned, anchored to objects, insulated from death. He speaks of imprints and echoes, of a self that can be edited like a manuscript rather than worshipped as sacred scripture. The implication is corrosive and intoxicating. If the soul is malleable, then guilt is negotiable, and destiny is just poor editing. By the time the chamber opens, Harry is no longer a boy stumbling into a legend. He is a novice theorist, testing a model. The descent into the stone throat beneath the castle reads, in his mind, like a case study Tom forgot to finish. When the basilisk strikes, he does not simply stand and wait for Fawkes. Instinct, fear, and half-remembered diagrams from the less strange grimoire fuse into action. He drags his wand across the air in a harsh, spiraling arc, shaping a draining charm Bellatrix never quite trusted him to attempt. The spell latches on to the basilisk's massive life force, siphoning vitality and venom alike into a contained vortex of light and shadow. It is brutal, ugly magic. Every second feels like holding a live wire with bare hands, but it works. The venom that should have ended him becomes fuel, transmuted into a shield that lets the sword strike true. The victory is not clean, it is paid for in knowledge. When he finally drives the basilisk fang through the diary, the scream that rips the air is not just Tom's. It is the severing of a dialogue, the destruction of a mirror that had been flattering his darkest competencies. Harry rejects Tom's ownership, the subtle attempt to claim him as heir and extension, but he does not discard the lessons. If a fragment of riddle could survive in a book, then dark knowledge can be weaponized, turned back upon its architect. The Slytherin timeline gains a new axiom: only someone who understands the abyss can reliably aim it. As he leaves the ruined chamber, blood on his hands and soul still thrumming with stolen serpent life, Harry is not thinking about detentions or house points. He is thinking about what else the world has decided must never be taught, and how dangerous it is to leave that syllabus in other people's hands. Off-screen Hogwarts, how a dark-leaning Harry warps the timeline. The road to war does not begin with a proclamation. It begins with how Harry walks out of the chamber. In this timeline, he emerges not as a shaken child, but as a boy who has watched a basilisk die and catalogued the way its magic unspools from the corpse. The rumour that survives 1992 is not about Ginny Weasley's brush with death. It is about Harry Potter's unearthly calm. Whispers spread that he spoke Parseltongue to the serpent as it died, that he did not flinch when the venom scorched his skin, that he walked beside Dumbledore afterward in a silence that felt like two generals leaving a battlefield. Officially, Ginny recovers. Unofficially, the chamber becomes his first classified operation, and the school adjusts around the unsettling resonance of a second year who looks at catastrophe like an exam he has already passed. By 1993, that resonance acquires a visible outline. Dementors patrol the grounds, yet students notice the pattern. They drift away from Harry in the corridors, veering as if repelled, not attracted. They are wrong about why. They assume some secret Gryffindor courage. What they are sensing is a mind trained into smooth, alpine stillness, occlumency, layered over a growing familiarity with predatory magic. Snape notices. His habitual contempt is interrupted by professional curiosity, and his eyes on Harry become a constant, needling surveillance. Cause and effect begin to braid into a tighter rope. A more competent, darker-edged Harry does not bungle polyjuice, does not shout accusations in public corridors. He moves with methodical certainty. Malfoy, confronted not with a reckless rival, but with a tactically lethal peer, recalibrates early. The sneer becomes a wary nod, then a grudging respect. Dumbledore, watching from the staff table, feels the leash of moral authority slip one notch looser each term. A weapon being polished in the dark is still a weapon. He simply cannot tell whose hand will close around the hilt. By 1994, the Triwizard Tournament exposes what Hogwarts has only felt in outline. Harry's dueling style, honed in secret practice rooms and the restricted section's more honest shelves, looks almost Slytherin. Low stances, angled shields, transfiguration used not for spectacle, but for traps that linger on the field like landmines. The world applauds his ingenuity. They are wrong again. What they are cheering is a masterpiece to be moulded, and no one agrees on the sculptor. Voldemort, watching through proxies and fractured soul resonance, adjusts his own strategy. This is not merely a sacrificial lamb to be lured to a graveyard. This is a possible rival or asset. Barty Crouch Jr. is instructed not just to deliver Harry, but to probe him. The third task becomes a psychological vivisection, illusions calibrated to test mercy, curses tuned to measure how readily he answers force with escalation. Every response is data for a Dark Lord who has finally met a variable he cannot fully predict. With each school year, the question shifts. It is no longer whether Harry will cross certain ethical lines, but how far, and on whose behalf. The war is not approaching. It is being drawn, magnet-like, toward the boy whose spellwork hums in eerie harmony with its darkest currents. By the time the wider wizarding world realizes he is not the compliant weapon they imagined, he has already assembled a private arsenal of forbidden techniques, curated not to Voldemort's morality or Dumbledore's, but to his own evolving doctrine of acceptable sacrifice. The real danger is simple. No one yet knows what that doctrine demands, and the next crisis will force him to declare it. Year 3, Dementors, Patronuses, and life-draining defense. The declaration arrives on a rattling Hogwarts express, wrapped in frost and breathless screams. The world believes Dementors are merely guards, instruments of ministry authority that happen to be unpleasant. They are wrong. When the carriage door slides open and the first Dementor leans in, Harry does not simply faint. The temperature plummets, glass fogs, and the air thickens into a pressure front. But beneath the sensory horror, he feels something else. A tidal pull on his soul resonance, a familiar drag that echoes the siphoning diagrams in his alpine grimoire. The Dementor is not just feeding, it is channeling, converting terror into structured hunger. For a heartbeat, Harry is less victim than observer, watching his own warmth being rewritten into someone else's currency. The pattern interrupts him. A void that behaves like a spell. A predator that feels uncomfortably like a ritual. Lupin's chocolate and quiet concern arrive as in canon. But in this timeline, the lesson that matters is not comfort, it is methodology. When Lupin later introduces the Patronus, he frames it as pure defense, the antithesis of everything Harry has been studying in secret. A shield of light, a memory of joy, a refusal to engage the dark. Harry tries, again and again in the empty classroom, to summon that canonical stag, but the charm feels thin, like a flimsy ward sketched over an exposed fault line. So he begins to cheat. In private, he grafts darker principles onto Lupin's elegant theory, asking the question Lupin will never voice. If a Dementor can drain, why can't a wizard invert the current? He experiments at the edge of exhaustion, shaping a Patronus, not as a beacon, but as a siphon, visualizing a shield that drinks the cold, metabolizing despair into fuel. The incantation remains the same, but the intent mutates. The happy memory is no longer sanctuary, it is bait. He does not master it. Not fully. The magic bucks and snarls, once collapsing into a ring of silvery mist that feels wrong in his hands. Too dense, too hungry, a weapon being polished in the dark rather than a guardian. Yet something in his resonance changes. When he finally produces a corporeal Patronus under Lupin's gaze, It is brighter than expected, antlerless, razored in outline, the light edged with a faint predatory sharpness that Lupin cannot quite name. Buckbeak's near execution and Sirius's almost kiss with the Dementors drive the lesson deeper. Watching a proud creature and an innocent man nearly erased by process and precedent, Harry internalizes a brutal theorem. The system is not a fortress. It is a stage on which innocents are offered up to maintain the illusion of order. In the Slytherin timeline, that realization is not merely tragic, it is catalytic. Sometimes the only way to stop a predator is to become something predators fear. On the shore of the lake, surrounded by the echo of his own heartbeat and the fading screams of his mother, he casts the massive Patronus. The stag charges, impossibly vast, driving the Dementors back in a tidal wave of argent light. Canon insists, he thinks, "I knew I could do it." In this timeline, another thought rides just beneath it, colder and far more dangerous. I knew I could do more. The Dementors retreat. The light fades. But that second thought remains, coiled and patient, a masterpiece to be molded by the next war that dares to touch him. The dark counterpart, Voldemort, upgraded, sooner and smarter. That second thought does not go unnoticed. Somewhere far from Hogwarts, in a graveyard that history insists is merely the stage for a rebirth, reality itself is being re-edited. They are wrong. In this timeline, the cauldron in Little Hangleton is not just a vessel for flesh, it is a tuning fork driven into the bedrock of magical lore. And Harry's blood is the note that changes everything. The ritual proceeds with its familiar grotesquerie: bone of the father, flesh of the servant, blood of the enemy. But the enemy is no longer a frightened child, clinging to moral binaries. Harry steps forward with methodical certainty, offering his blood, not as a victim, but as a weapon, and the magic responds. When it strikes the cauldron, there is a moment of absolute silence, as if the world inhales. Then the green fire twists, folds inward, and for a heartbeat, the graveyard is flooded with a shared soul resonance, a dark echo binding two trajectories into one constellation. Voldemort rises, but this is not the waxy, snake-faced revenant of canon. He emerges, refined, youthful, almost eerily beautiful, his features smoothed into a cold, ageless symmetry, the body of a young prodigy carrying the accumulated cruelty of an ancient tyrant. Power settles over him like a tailored cloak. He flexes his fingers and feels, faint but undeniable, the distant pressure of another mind honed by occlumency, another will that has stared into abyssal magic and not flinched. He tastes Harry's earlier Patronus on the air like ozone after lightning, and smiles. In this Slytherin timeline, that smile changes the war. Canon insists he should unleash immediate terror, send Dementors and giants crashing against the boundaries of the fragile world. Instead, he pauses. A weapon being polished in the dark has announced itself, and Voldemort has always been a connoisseur of rare instruments. Why shatter the board when the most interesting piece has not yet chosen its side? He recalibrates his campaign with tactically lethal patience. The raids grow subtler, the deaths more targeted, each atrocity chosen as a psychological probe rather than a spectacle. His orders to the Death Eaters shift. Harry Potter is not to be eliminated on sight, but stressed, tempted, mapped. Test his loyalties to Dumbledore. Test his threshold for unforgivable spells. Test the fracture lines between the boy who casts a perfect Patronus and the strategist who walks into a graveyard offering his own blood. Around them, the old prophecy begins to warp under the strain of this new resonance. It no longer reads as a simple equation of predator and prey. It feels instead like a thesis on authorship. Two stars in a dark constellation, each orbiting the other, each redefining what darkness can mean when wielded with authority rather than frenzy. One must vanquish, the other, yes, but vanquish might mean killing, consuming, or something far more insidious. Assimilation. Voldemort's obsession evolves accordingly. Conquering death is no longer sufficient. Immortality without narrative is just a prolonged footnote. What matters now is the story the future will tell about power itself. If he can bend Harry, make the boy who lived his heir, his mirror, or his greatest failed masterpiece, then the war stops being an aberration and becomes precedent. Darkness will not be remembered as a temporary sickness of the age, but as the inevitable evolution of magic, the moment the fortress of light admitted it needed shadow to stand. And somewhere deep in Hogwarts, Harry feels that new attentions settle on him like a hand on the back of his neck and does not yet pull away. Year 4, Tournament of Blood and the Ethics of Winning. The hand on the back of his neck becomes a spotlight in the arena. By the time the first task arrives, the world has agreed that Harry Potter's ingenuity with a summoning charm is evidence of Gryffindor-style bravery. They are wrong. In this timeline, the Accio Firebolt solution is only the surface narrative, the version fit for newspapers and schoolyard legend. Beneath it, Harry is conducting a private experiment on his own nervous system. In the champion's tent, as the crowd roars above like a distant storm, he stands in cultivated stillness and taps his wand against his own sternum, threading a minor fear-amplifying hex into his chest. It is not meant to calm him. It is meant to sharpen him. Bellatrix once called fear the body's crude attempt at prophecy. Harry refines that prophecy into weaponized reflex, letting the dark charm spike his adrenaline and then riding that wave with methodical certainty. When he steps into the arena, the dragon's roar does not paralyze him. It clarifies the world into angles, trajectories, and timing. The boy who lived is not just surviving a dragon. He is stress testing a self-directed enhancement, a weapon being polished in the dark. The second task pushes that logic underwater. Canon remembers a noble boy stunning Grindylows and bargaining with merfolk. The Slytherin timeline replaces that with controlled cruelty, wrapped in clinical curiosity. Gillyweed carries him into the green silence of the lake, but what matters is what he does when the first cluster of Grindylows rushes him, claws outstretched. He does not merely blast them away. He flicks his wand and releases a binding charm of his own design, a constricting lattice that tightens with every struggle, converting resistance into restraint. The more they fight, the less they can move. When he is satisfied with their immobilization, he loosens the web with a thought and watches them flee. Efficient, reversible, tactically lethal if scaled. Against the merfolk, he repeats the pattern, non-lethal but undeniably coercive. and files away the soul resonance of that power. Control without overt bloodshed, domination disguised as discipline. By the third task, the maze is not a mystery, it is an ethical thesis statement. As he navigates hedges that whisper, curses that twist perception, and creatures bound by magic older than the ministry's regulations, Harry recognizes dark constructs by their texture, by the way they hum against his skin. The adults have already accepted that students may meet lethal enchantments for the sake of spectacle and treaty. That tacit permission loosens his restraint. If the Fortress of Light sanctions this level of risk, why should he pretend the war is not already here? His encounter with Cedric becomes the hinge. He still diverts a curse, still hauls Cedric away from a Scroot with a snapped command, still insists they take the cup together. But when the Portkey delivers them to the graveyard, his first instinct is not to flee. It is to observe. As Voldemort's ritual unfolds, bone, blood, flesh, Harry catalogues components with a detached, almost academic chill. So that's how you do it, he thinks, tracing the geometry of the cauldron, the sequence of incantations, the way the air itself warps around returning authority. He escapes, as history demands, dragging Cedric's corpse back to Hogwarts, scar burning like an opened brand. Yet the boy shaking in the hospital wing is not only traumatized, he is newly educated. He has witnessed a full dark resurrection and survived, and the knowledge coils in him like a second spine. Could the process be reversed? Could a body be called without a soul, or a soul without a loyal body? Could that framework be subverted, or, in the unspoken corners of his mind, improved? The world thinks the Triwizard Tournament has given them a champion. In this timeline, it has given them a researcher, and as the year closes, one question begins to stalk him through the corridors of Hogwarts. If resurrection is a spellwork problem, then what, exactly, is death to a boy who refuses to be anyone's finished masterpiece? He will find an answer, but the price of that answer is about to walk through the castle doors. Year 5. Occlumency, Snape, and the seduction of control. The price arrives in black buttons and billowing robes. Severus Snape walks back into Harry's life, not as a classroom tyrant, but as a state-mandated surgeon of the mind. The Ministry has seen enough visions, enough corridor collapses, enough prophecy-tinged outbursts to demand intervention. Dumbledore frames occlumency as protection. Snape does not bother with that fiction. In this timeline, he looks at Harry and recognizes an echo of his own younger self, volatile, humiliated, and terrifyingly capable of focus when pain is correctly harnessed. The lessons begin in the familiar way. Snape's barked commands, Harry's resentment, the blank chill of the office like a personal fortress against intrusion. But the pattern fractures quickly. After the first brutal incursion into Harry's memories, Snape pauses, studying the boy who refuses to cry, refuses even to shout. There is a flicker of professional interest. This is not a child flailing against authority. This is a weapon being polished in the dark, if only someone is ruthless enough to grind away the softness. From that moment, the curriculum shifts. Snape stops merely repelling Voldemort and starts shaping Potter. He reframes every failure as evidence of weakness, every flare of empathy as a tactical liability in war. "Your compassion," he says one evening, voice almost bored, "is an open door. Close it, and the Dark Lord has nothing to grab. What canon treated as hostility becomes, in this Slytherin timeline, a cold mentorship. Snape demonstrates how to wall off entire emotional categories, how to let insults hit a deadened surface rather than a living nerve. Then he goes further. By the 4th week, the boundary between defense and seduction has eroded. In passing, as if mentioning potions' ingredients, he references techniques for blurring the edges of one's own memories, sanding down fear responses, muting grief spikes. He never calls it dark magic. He does not need to. The resonance is obvious. This is how a spy survives. This is how a boy with too many dead faces in his past might keep functioning long after a healthier mind would break. The disastrous lesson is inevitable. Harry, driven by the same research impulse that sent him hunting resurrection theory in the library, pushes back too hard. His counter-curse slips, his mind lashes out, and suddenly he is inside Snape. He sees the jeering faces, the dangling humiliation by the lake, the moment where a clever, flayed child decided that love was a vulnerability, not a salvation. Canon Harry feels pity. This, Harry feels something darker. Kinship. Pain, he realizes, can be reforged into precision if you are willing to cauterize everything that does not serve. That revelation waits, quiet and patient, until the Ministry. The battle unfolds with the same chaotic choreography, but when Sirius falls through the veil, the impact inside Harry is different. Grief hits like volcanic glass, sharp, molten, lethal. The occlumency scaffolding holds. Instead of shattering, his mind bottles the eruption, compresses it into a single glacial vow. Never again will someone he loves die, because he was too good to use the power available. They call the dark arts corrupting. They are wrong. In his new internal narrative, ignorance is the true corruption. As the dust of the department settles, the psychological ledger is brutally clear. Dumbledore has kept him ignorant, sentimental, and strategically underarmed. Snape, for all his cruelty, has given him techniques, language, and a blueprint for turning trauma into leverage. Harry walks out of the Ministry not as a chastened child, but as a researcher with a new field of study. From now on, he will decide which tools are acceptable. Occlumency, legilimency, memory alteration, emotional dampening. These are no longer forbidden arts, but variables in an experiment. The dark arts are not a forbidden forest to skirt around. They are a map he intends to redraw with methodical certainty. The war has taken his godfather. In response, Harry quietly chooses to become tactically lethal, and somewhere in the alpine silence of his own mind, a door closes that will not easily reopen. The hidden curriculum, forbidden books, secret corridors, and a rogue professor. Hogwarts likes to pretend it is neutral ground, an ancient fortress floating serenely above the war. They are wrong. In this timeline, the castle itself becomes an accomplice. Brick, book, and breathing mentor aligning to turn Harry's grief into curriculum. The candidates orbit him almost immediately. Snape, with his scathing contempt and buried, reluctant fascination with Harry's occlumency. The grimoire, whose sole resonance has already threaded itself through his dreams. And the new defense professor, a quietly infamous curse breaker named Professor Veylan, imported from Eastern European battlefields under the euphemism of practical experience. It is Veylan who commits. He looks at Harry and does not see a traumatized boy. He sees a masterpiece to be molded. Veylan's first offer is deceptively orthodox. Extra defense tutorials framed as preparation for a world that will not wait for syllabi. The door closes, the classroom wards seal with a soft predatory click, and the subject matter slides immediately towards the borderlands. He teaches Harry jinxes that shatter tendons without breaking skin, binding hexes calibrated to collapse a nervous system for exactly 60 seconds, counter curses that only function if the caster understands in anatomical detail what the original dark spell is doing to bone and blood. Knowledge as antidote, knowledge as weapon. From there, the conversations darken. Veylan dismantles the ministry's taxonomy with academic precision, asking why a painless killing curse is unforgivable, while a legally sanctioned blood-boiling hex is not, why the Imperius is banned, but love potions are sold over the counter. Harry, already operating with methodical certainty, absorbs the implication. The law is not a moral line. It is a political map. Maps can be redrawn. Hogwarts, meanwhile, ceases to be a school and becomes an archive of buried techniques. Veylan does not merely escort Harry into the restricted section. He teaches him to read the gaps on the shelves, to trace where entire branches of magic have been quietly excised. Unused classrooms become laboratories. Disused dueling platforms remember, in the hum of their wardstones, patterns of impact from older, darker tournaments. Under Veylan's guidance, Harry learns to listen to the castle, palming the walls, feeling the faint, thrumming resonance of archaic ward weaves, extracting from them fragments of forgotten detection charms and shield geometries lost from polite curricula. Competence follows with terrifying speed. Harry develops non-lethal but brutal hexes that can drop a masked Death Eater in under 3 seconds. Ligaments locked, lungs spasming, wand hand numb. He refines detection webs that flare whenever blood magic is worked within 100 yards, delicate tracer runes braided invisibly into the existing Hogwarts protections. Most dangerously, he learns to smear and fold his own magical signature, leaving behind decoys so that any spell audit points to a dead corridor, a convenient ghost, a statistical anomaly, a weapon being polished in the dark. The section closes on a corridor most students never see, somewhere between the dungeons and the old foundations. Midnight. Silence. A stone gargoyle stands watch, then jerks, fractures, and collapses as a curse hits with surgical force, leaving its face cracked, smoking, half melted into the flagstones. Harry lowers his wand, heart hammering, the smell of scorched granite oddly like burnt bone. For a moment, guilt surfaces, thin, bright, human. Then, occlumency walls rise, alpine and impenetrable, and the feeling is filed away like any other variable. Better, he tells himself, to learn this here than on a battlefield. The Slytherin timeline tightens around that rationalization, and the castle listens, quietly taking note. Hogwarts rewritten. Friends, foes, and the politics of a dark prodigy. Hogwarts adjusts before anyone consciously decides to adjust to Harry. the social gravity simply tilts. The boy who treats dark magic like advanced mathematics does not move through the castle without consequence. Ron feels it first. In this timeline, he watches his best friend walk away from duels with a calm, predatory stillness that does not belong to a 13-year-old. Harry's hexes land with methodical certainty, joints locking, wands flying, pain calibrated rather than explosive. Ron is unsettled because he grew up on tales where dark magic is a binary, evil, full stop. But loyalty in the Weasley line is a reflex, so he tells himself Harry is just doing what he has to in a war the adults already lost, that a tactically lethal friend is better than a noble corpse. It is a rationalization with teeth. Hermione's reaction is quieter and far more dangerous. She is horrified by the incantations Harry tests in abandoned classrooms, by the way the air thickens with that faint metallic resonance whenever he pushes a curse past safe parameters. And yet, the theory is irresistible. Restricted section grimoires, half-erased marginalia in the Half-Blood Prince's old notes, Slughorn's evasive hints about soul magic. She assembles them with the same relentless precision she once applied to arithmancy charts. She becomes an uneasy co-conspirator, drawing lines on parchment about what they will not cross, then finding herself, weeks later, helping Harry calculate exactly how close to those lines he can stand without falling in. A masterpiece to be molded, she tells herself, not a weapon being polished in the dark. Across the hall, Draco Malfoy recalibrates. Their rivalry does not vanish. It mutates. Draco recognizes, with Slytherin clarity, that Harry's darkness is not chaos, but channeled authority, a kind of inverted nobility. When Harry uses a Slytherin curse to silently disarm a 6th year who was tormenting a younger Parkinson cousin, Draco sees something his father never offered: power deployed to protect, not merely to dominate. In that moment, Lucius's ideology begins to look provincial. Draco does not defect, not yet, but allegiance becomes a question rather than an axiom, and questions are how revolutions start in the Slytherin timeline. The staff notice in fragments. McGonagall observes that Harry's transfigurations are no longer instinctive flourishes. They are surgical, edges too sharp, animals too still, as if he is rehearsing battlefield transformations. Flitwick, watching dueling practice, has the unnerving sense Harry is holding back, counting angles in silence, testing trajectories he never casts. Dumbledore feels it most acutely in the quiet of his office, when he brushes against Harry's mind where there was once turbulent, honest grief. There is now opacity, fogged glass where there used to be clear water, occlumency walls, rising alpine and uninvited. Rumour does the rest. First years whisper that Harry can hex you without moving his lips, that Dementors flinch at his name because his soul resonance tastes wrong, half shadow and half sanctuary. Some students avoid his gaze in corridors, others drift into his orbit, convinced that if war is inevitable, then standing near the darkest star is the safest place to be. A few, the most pragmatic, begin to hope he will end the war by any means necessary, and they are wrong only in thinking that end and survive are synonyms. Hogwarts ceases to be a sanctuary and reveals itself as an arena that was always there. Every corridor conversation becomes a probe, every house rivalry a proxy conflict, every late-night patrol a negotiation over how much of his darkness Harry is willing to reveal and to whom. With each choice, alliances shift by degrees that feel trivial in the moment and tectonic in retrospect. The castle listens, the portraits gossip, the ghosts drift closer. And somewhere in the deep stone, a new equilibrium is forming, one that will demand, very soon, that Harry prove whether he commands the dark or the dark commands him. Endgame paths, anti-hero, dark lord, or double agent of the abyss. The equilibrium that forms around him is an illusion. In this timeline, every balance point is only a pause between descents. The question is not whether Harry falls, but how far and what shape his landing carves into the world. The first trajectory is the grey anti-hero, the vigilante architect of a necessary nightmare. Here, Harry keeps one rule that Bellatrix never taught him. The dark is for enemies and corrupt authorities only. Death Eaters vanish in alleys with their memories peeled back. Wizengamot fossils wake to find their vaults emptied and their blackmail archives delivered to the Prophet. He wins the war with methodical certainty, turning the sovereign army into a tactically lethal scalpel rather than a crown. But victory curdles. The public that once knelt in the courtyard now whispers about the boy who can flay a mind in silence. Friendships with Draco and Hermione survive in name, yet every shared glance carries the question of what he would do if they ever stood in his way. In the end, he exiles himself to some alpine fortress or slips into a permanent, off-the-books role as the Ministry's unmentionable weapon, a monster on retainer. The second path snaps when the last thin ligaments of trust finally tear. A dead Hermione in the Department of Mysteries instead of Dumbledore, a Draco sacrificed by his own father, a Bellatrix executed by the Ministry after the war, for balance. Choose any combination and the result is the same. The soul resonance that once tethered Harry to human connection fractures. They say the world will never endure another Voldemort. They are wrong. Harry decides the world will never again be allowed the freedom to create one. As rival Dark Lord, he centralizes every dangerous artifact, every cursed grimoire, under his personal authority. Azkaban becomes a research site, not a prison. Dementors are leashed rather than banished. His regime is built on fear, but with clear, almost contractual boundaries. No random purges, no blood purity, just an ironclad calculus of utility. The Slytherin timeline ends with a world superficially safer and infinitely more constrained, ruled by a man who has become a masterpiece to be molded only by his own trauma. The third ending hides itself even from those closest to him. Harry plunges into the dark so convincingly that even Hermione doubts the core she helped shape. He accepts the mark, kneels in Voldemort's inner circle, and uses forbidden soul magic to hunt Horcruxes from within, each ritual scraping another layer off his own psyche. Every success leaves residue, whispers in parcel tongue when he sleeps, a reflexive reach for the Cruciatus when startled. When Voldemort finally falls, no one can quite prove whether Harry was savior or successor, and he cannot convincingly deny either. In all three paths, the cost is the same architecture, built from different bricks, relationships strained to translucence or shattered entirely, a psyche that will never again trust its own impulses, and a legacy future historians will argue over in cold seminar rooms. Did Harry Potter save them, or simply prototype a more efficient tyranny? Which endgame resonates most with the boy in the cupboard, the teenager screaming in the ministry, the young man who already reached for unforgivable curses when cornered? And what does your answer reveal about the threshold at which you too would accept a necessary evil? The moment of no return. One spell, one choice, one new Harry. The threshold arrives not with prophecy, but with a miscalculation. They are wrong to imagine Harry's moral collapse as a grand operatic coronation in green light. In this timeline, the decisive fracture of his ethics occurs in a narrow stone corridor outside the death chamber, under flickering torches and the sound of Hermione Granger choking on her own breath. The battle in the Department of Mysteries has already degenerated into a tactically lethal maze. Spells ricochet, time sands spill, prophecies shatter. Harry has been directing the others with methodical certainty, turning the Ministry's inner sanctum into a provisional fortress of broken archways and fallen Death Eaters. Then the pattern breaks. A masked figure, Dolohov in this world, still alive, still vicious, slips through a side passage and sights Hermione as she drags a stunned Neville toward cover. Harry sees the angle, the distance, the inevitability. Standard shields will be a fraction too slow. A stunner will not land before Dolohov's curse does. This is the precise scenario Bellatrix and Snape constructed in those Alpine training chambers. A no-win equation unless one is willing to redraw the rules. His wand is already moving when the decision presents itself, not as temptation, but as option. He reaches for the spell he has never used in open combat, the one he quarantined behind occlumency walls and academic euphemism. Not Cruciatus, worse in its precision, a nerve-shredding hex from a nameless grimoire designed to leave the body intact and the mind screaming, to crush will while preserving every receptor for pain. He knows exactly what it does. He casts it anyway. The incantation leaves his mouth in a voice that is not raised, only sharpened. The magic answers with terrifying obedience. Dolohov's curse dies on his lips as his wand arm spasms, then his knees buckle. He hits the stone convulsing, fingers clawing at air only he can feel. Silence knifes through the chaos as nearby fighters register that this is not the red of a stunner or the clean finality of Avada Kedavra. This is uglier. It lingers. For one suspended heartbeat, Harry feels only relief. Clean, bright, absolute. Hermione is alive. Neville is dragging her fully behind cover. The line holds. Underneath that relief, however, something else blooms. A grim, private satisfaction at how perfectly the curse performed, how elegantly it resolved the equation. The Slytherin timeline has trained him to appreciate efficiency. The appreciation lands like a stain. Then the backlash hits. His wand arm throbs with a phantom echo of Dolohov's convulsions, nerves humming as though the spell has left residue under his skin. His scar prickles, not with Voldemort's proximity, but with a deeper soul resonance, a low, dark chord that seems to approve. For an instant, the world narrows to the sound of Dolohov's hoarse, animal whimpering. Externally, the board shifts. Neville flinches when Harry strides past the fallen Death Eater, without a glance. Tonks, arriving just in time to see the aftermath, hesitates before meeting his eyes. Enemies recalibrate. The boy who lived is no longer merely dangerous. He is a weapon being polished in the dark, willing to maim minds while sparing bodies. Somewhere far above the ministry, Voldemort feels the spike in the magical field, tastes the particular flavor of that cruelty, and laughs. A short, delighted sound that makes his followers shudder. Dumbledore, dueling like a storm in the atrium, feels it too. His eyes, when they cut briefly toward the department below, are not twinkling. They are cold, measuring whether the boy he gambled the war on has already slipped beyond his moral authority. The battle ends. The paperwork, the funerals, the headlines will come later. The moment of no return arrives in the quiet, when Harry is alone in a guest room at Grimmauld Place, wand on the bedside table, replaying the corridor in forensic detail. He catalogues alternatives, reruns trajectories, searches for a version of events where Hermione survives without Dolohov's mind being shredded. He finds none, so he tells himself, with the same methodical certainty he once used to solve homework problems, that he would do it again, that the alternative was worse, that this is simply the arithmetic of war. The real transformation is not the spell itself, but the way the revulsion comes and goes, and the acceptance stays. In this timeline, Harry Potter does not merely touch the dark and recoil. He begins to plan around it, and once you start planning around a line you've crossed, the next line is already eroding, rewriting the final battle, dark magic against its maker. By the time the final battle reaches the Great Hall, the world still thinks it understands Harry Potter. They are wrong. In this timeline, he does not walk in as a sacrificial lamb murmuring Expelliarmus. He advances like a strategist entering a war room he has rehearsed 1,000 times. A weapon being polished in the dark, finally unsheathed under vaulted stone. Hogwarts is no longer a school. It is a wounded fortress. Walls spiderwebbed with curse fractures, banners half incinerated, the air thick with the metallic tang of spent magic and the lingering resonance of unforgivables. Giants' footsteps echo distantly, punctuated by the thin, hysterical laughter of a dying banshee curse in some shattered corridor. Harry crosses this devastation with methodical certainty, each stride calibrated, each breath measured. The years of forbidden study and soul resonance calculations converging on this single walk. When he steps into the Great Hall, the tableau is familiar and utterly altered. Bodies, living and dead, form a ragged ring. Bellatrix's eyes burn from the crowd. Snape's expression is a mask of unreadable assessment. Hermione stands rigid, wand clenched so tightly her knuckles blanch. At the far end, beneath the floating, guttering candles, Voldemort waits, less a man than an exposed system of magic, a lattice of fragmented soul anchored in pale flesh. The duel does not begin with taunts. It begins with velocity. Voldemort's opening volley is a braided sequence of curses. Killing curse, bone-shattering hex, a slicing charm tuned to arterial targets, launched so quickly they blur into a single, emerald-streaked storm. Harry answers not with one defiant, disarming spell, but with a counterpoint of dark lexicon, a shield web that drinks kinetic force, a silent severing charm that peels curses apart mid-flight. a binding spiral that tries to knot Voldemort's magic back onto its caster. Their wands carve mirrored sigils into the air, two dialects of the same forbidden language. Sectum Sempra collides with a flaying curse older than the ministry itself. Fiend fire, compressed into a lance instead of a tidal wave, screams past a conjured wall of obsidian glass. For onlookers, the exchange is nearly incomprehensible, magic moving at a speed that feels tactically lethal, the great hall's very stones buckling under the pressure. But Harry is not truly aiming at Voldemort's body. The visible duel is camouflage for the real offensive, drawing on years of clandestine research, Slughorn's poisoned memories, Dumbledore's scattered notes, Bellatrix's whispered lore. He begins to weave a curse that does not seek flesh at all. It seeks architecture, the architecture of a soul deliberately shattered and nailed to the world. Under the surface of the spellfire, Harry's magic threads into the cracks of Voldemort's being, following the hairline fractures left by each destroyed Horcrux. He inverts the logic of Horcrux creation, not by tearing soul off, but by forcing the fragments to recognize one another, to collapse inward, to devour instead of anchor. It is soul magic as implosion, a masterpiece to be molded in reverse. To do it, he must offer collateral. His own soul brushes the edges of the working, skimming the same abyss Tom once embraced. He feels the pull, promises of power without limit, of authority unchallenged, if he will only keep the mechanism and redirect it. He understands, with brutal clarity, that this curse may scar him beyond death, that whatever comes after may find him altered. He accepts, not as a Gryffindor gesture of purity, but as a Slytherin calculation that the annihilation of this particular darkness is worth betting his afterlife. The Slytherin timeline converges here, one boy wagering eternity to erase a rival god. Voldemort's fall is not theatrical. No ricocheting curse, no triumphant explosion. His next killing curse stutters mid-arc as his magic folds in on itself, green light curdling into black, then into nothing. His body does not fly, it simply loosens, like a puppet whose strings have been cut from the inside. The sound is not a bang, it is an absence. Silence drops over the great hall, thick and wrong, as if a piece of the world's darkness has been amputated and the room is suddenly off balance. Harry stands in that silence, feeling the phantom limb of a power that is no longer there, and the echo of the mechanism he just used, still ticking inside his own chest. Because if he can unmake a Dark Lord this way, the question isn't whether the war is over, it's what he chooses to do with that knowledge next. Aftermath. A world saved by a wizard it no longer understands. The world erupts before it understands what it is applauding. The courtyard becomes a roar of wands and voices, a tidal cheer crashing against the fresh absence where Voldemort once stood. For many, in this timeline, the image is simple and almost comforting. The Dark Lord falls, Harry Potter remains standing. Therefore, the story is over. They are wrong, because some did not just see Voldemort fall. They saw what Harry used to make it happen. The sigils that burned in the air with an almost Horcrux-like soul resonance. The way his magic did not merely strike, but unmade, as if the world itself had become a weapon being polished in the dark and briefly placed in his hand. Those who stood close enough remember the silence between heartbeats, the way their own spells felt suddenly parochial, schoolyard charms beside an execution written in forbidden grammar. Rumours move faster than any owl. By nightfall, half the wizarding world believes Harry channeled a lost branch of ancient magic that only a chosen one could survive. The other half whispers that no human should know what he clearly knows now. In some versions, he is a necessary evil, a tactically lethal instrument fate happened to aim in the right direction. In others, he is the next threat, Voldemort's true heir, not by blood, but by method. Institutional reactions fracture along those same fault lines. The Provisional Ministry, still operating from a half-ruined fortress of paperwork and wards, convenes emergency sessions whose minutes will later be heavily redacted. Can you prosecute the wizard who just ended the war? Can you not? Aurors who watched colleagues die under unforgivable curses argue that to condemn Harry's spell work would be hypocrisy bordering on treason. They themselves used lethal curses under orders. Dumbledore's surviving allies, McGonagall, Kingsley, a hollow-eyed Lupin, take it further. In war, the Ministry sanctioned Dementors and the quiet erasure of inconvenient witnesses. To single out Harry now would be a moral convenience, not a standard. The press, predictably, becomes a mirror maze. Some front pages crown him Saviour Absolute and sketch radiant light where there was only ash. Others run grainy photographs of his final sigil and ask whether the boy who lived has become the man who should be feared. Editorials in this Slytherin timeline pivot weekly, lionizing him when public fear spikes, demonizing him when the need for a scapegoat becomes politically useful. The institutions can debate in committee rooms. Harry's friends have to live with him in corridors and kitchens. Ron experiences a quiet, grinding cognitive dissonance. The mate who shared jokes in the common room is now the wizard who did what even Dumbledore would not. Some nights, Ron defends him with almost violent loyalty. Others, he stares at Harry's hands and cannot quite make himself forget what they did. Hermione reacts with methodical certainty. She dives into legal history and magical theory, excavating every precedent on dark arts, intent, and consent. If the world will not update its ethics to match the weapons it has unleashed, she will force the argument into the open, publishing essays, drafting proposed statutes, attempting to define when forbidden magic becomes a crime and when it becomes a grim necessity. To her, Harry is not a monster or a saint. He is a case study that will determine the next century. Ginny, or the person who loves him most in this timeline, has the least abstract task. She must decide whether she can love a masterpiece to be molded that has already been sculpted by war into something sharp-edged and partially unknowable. She has seen him gentle and exhausted, seen him wake, choking on memories of what that final spell felt like, the way power begged to be used again. Loving him now means accepting that he walked to the edge of the abyss and left fingerprints on it. Harry's options crystallize with brutal clarity. He can accept the role the world is already drafting for him, public symbol, living reminder that darkness can be wielded responsibly, paraded at ceremonies as proof that their victory was righteous. Or he can vanish, slipping into obscurity so that no aspiring warlock can point to him and say, "See, it worked." There is a third path, one he never says aloud but turns over in private, to build, quietly, a new order of witches and wizards trained to handle the forbidden with discipline, a generation for whom the dark is not temptation, but curriculum. The tragedy and the salvation is that the world has been rescued by a wizard it no longer fully understands. In taverns and textbooks, Harry's name will become a fault line. Some will insist that he proved any magic is neutral, that intent is all. Others will argue that once you cross certain thresholds, intent is irrelevant. Future generations will study the final battle like a cursed artifact, arguing not just about how he did it, but whether they should be grateful, afraid, or both. And somewhere, Harry will live with the knowledge that the war ended not in pure light, but in a carefully controlled detonation of darkness that left him standing in the blast radius, permanently altered. Canon versus dark timeline, the moment you would change. And that detonation raises the central question of this entire experiment. At what precise moment did Harry step closest to that blast radius in canon? And how easily could the Slytherin timeline have slipped in to replace it? Consider the Mirror of Erased. In the original timeline, it is a melancholy refuge, a silent corridor where a neglected boy sits cross-legged and stares at a family he will never touch. The danger is framed as obsession, not corruption. Dumbledore removes the mirror, offers a gentle warning, and the world congratulates itself on a crisis averted. They are wrong. That is already soul resonance, a child alone at midnight, craving connection so intensely that any voice promising, "I can bring them back," would not have to push very hard. In this timeline, the mirror is not just a comfort, it is a doorway. The reflection of his parents does not merely smile, it gestures, drawing his gaze to an ornate grimoire resting at their spectral feet, a volume that appears only to him. The boy who once traced his mother's hand on cold glass now traces sigils in the dark, the invisibility cloak turning from toy to shroud as he vanishes into the restricted section, a weapon being polished in the dark without yet knowing it has an edge. Shift to the Chamber of Secrets. Canon Harry dives into the depths as a rescuer. The narrative crowns him for loyalty and courage. He destroys the diary, kills the basilisk, and walks out bloodied but morally intact. In the Slytherin timeline, the same descent becomes an apprenticeship. Tom Riddle does not merely monologue and dissolve. He bargains. He teaches. He shows Harry how a single memory in a diary nearly killed a girl and nearly toppled a school, and then he offers the knowledge behind the trick. The basilisk's corpse becomes an anatomy lesson in living weapons. The chamber, a subterranean classroom. Occlumency completes the triad. In canon, it is a failed lesson, poisoned by Snape's contempt and Harry's justified rage. The mind remains open, vulnerable. In our darker trajectory, occlumency succeeds too well. Harry learns to wall off not only Voldemort, but guilt, hesitation, and empathy, gaining methodical certainty at the cost of moral friction. His mind becomes a fortress. The question is what he chooses to store inside. So where, across all timelines, was the true tipping point? Was it the white-hot rage of Order of the Phoenix, hurling Cruciatus at Bellatrix in a corridor that still echoes with Sirius's fall? The desperate calculus of Deathly Hallows, whispering imperious in a Gringotts lobby, because there is allegedly no alternative? Or the quiet, almost tender curiosity of first-year wanderings under the cloak, when the forbidden section hummed like a closed throat, waiting to speak? Intent versus action fractures here. If Harry reserves dark spells for Death Eaters, does that preserve his heroism, or does the act of casting Cruciatus and Imperius canon facts, not hypotheticals, rewrite him regardless of target? When does "I had no choice" become an alibi rather than a truth? This is where you step in. Choose a divergence point. Place yourself in his body, with his cupboard years, his dead, his war, his hunger for any power that might keep one more name off a headstone, at the mirror, in the chamber, outside Umbridge's office, in the forest with Voldemort waiting. Do you reach for the forbidden spell? And if your hand closes around it once, do you truly believe you could put it down again? Because beneath the wands and wards, this is not only a Harry Potter thought experiment, it is a broader indictment of the stories we tell about power, trauma, and necessity. We insist we would refuse the dark if offered. But confronted with a world that keeps taking and taking, with a war that will not end, how many of us would accept becoming tactically lethal, so long as we could still call ourselves the hero in the silence afterward? From cupboard to conjurer of shadows, what this timeline reveals. In the wake of that question, the Slytherin timeline stops looking like a distant fantasy and begins to read like an autopsy report on a boy the world romanticized into safety. From Halloween 1981's soul resonance in Godric's Hollow to the final courtyard execution, this Harry's path is not a sudden fall from grace. It is a staircase, carved one compromise at a time. In the dark, the first step is not a curse, but a reflection. The mirror at 11 does here what it always threatened to do in canon. It teaches Harry that longing can be weaponized. In this timeline, he does not merely visit it, he studies it, mapping how desire bends perception, learning that if you can predict what someone aches for, you can move them like a chess piece. The mirror is not comfort, it is curriculum. The diary in the ruined second year continues the descent. Where Ginny once needed rescue, her absence leaves a vacuum that Tom Riddle exploits to test Harry directly, offering context, theory, and a vocabulary for the darkness already humming in his nerves. When Riddle speaks of power and inevitability, Harry recognizes the cadence of his own unvoiced rage. The chamber becomes less a lair and more a classroom in applied ruthlessness. By the time Dementors glide onto the Hogwarts Express, the transformation is visible. Their presence confirms what Bellatrix and the Alpine Estate always implied. The world will not stop punishing him for existing. Patronus' work in this configuration is not about happiness, it is about dominance over his own neurology. Each successful casting is an act of internal conquest, proof that he can bend even his trauma into disciplined, tactically lethal focus. Opplemency, which canon Harry resists, becomes in this narrative the central sacrament. Under Bellatrix, under Snape, under the silent pressure of a ministry that would cage him if it understood him, he refines mental walls into an intricate fortress. The boy in the cupboard becomes a weapon being polished in the dark, a masterpiece to be molded not by prophecy, but by the cold logic of survival in a war that will not wait for his moral clarity. Across all of this, runs the indictment of institutions. Hogwarts hides the restricted section. The Ministry criminalizes knowledge. Dumbledore withholds the Horcrux truth until the margins of disaster. They believe that by limiting information, they are limiting harm. They are wrong. In this timeline, every gap in Harry's education is filled not by safety, but by riddle, by Bellatrix, by the seductive authority of forbidden texts, but at least offer answers, however brutal. So when the final battle arrives, and Harry stands over a defeated Voldemort, the victory is real, but not clean. His magic carries residues of curses he will never entirely wash away. His ethics are a ledger rather than a creed. He has saved the world, but he has also proven that salvation can arrive wearing a tyrant's silhouette, which raises the uncomfortable function of these what-if architectures. They are not just games, they are stress tests. If changing only the guidance and framing around Harry's pain can produce a ruler who governs with methodical certainty instead of naive hope, what does that say about the fragility of heroism itself? And what happens when the next child with that resonance steps into the war we have been quietly preparing for them? Your turn in the dark. Choose the spell, rewrite the year. And that is the quiet horror beneath all of these what-if architectures. They are not just games, they are stress tests. In this timeline, and in every adjacent one, the wizarding world keeps gambling that a wounded child will always choose the light when offered a faster, sharper path through the dark. So now, the experiment passes to you. If you could take this Slytherin timeline and fracture it again, which Hogwarts year would you rewrite first under a fully tempted, fully self-aware Dark Harry? Do you want to see first year rebuilt around the mirror of Erised as a Horcrux adjacent conduit, second year as a duel of diaries beneath the school, or a fourth year where the Triwizard Maze becomes a ritual arena and Harry walks in as a weapon being polished in the dark? Name the year precisely, then choose the hand that turns the page. Is it Snape offering private, corrective lessons that slide from counter-curses into controlled cruciatus, his authority reframed as a brutal mercy? Is it a rogue professor who treats Harry as a masterpiece to be moulded, a living thesis on soul resonance and controlled corruption? Or is it the diary again, or another book in the restricted section, whispering with methodical certainty that knowledge is neutral and only cowards fear the spine of a darker text? Here is the ethical fracture line you need to argue in the comments. If Harry reserves his darkest spells for Death Eaters, does he remain a hero, or merely a more efficient executioner? When he uses the Cruciatus curse to break a torturer's mind, does intent cleanse a curse designed to unmake the self, or does the wand hand learn a pleasure it will not easily forget? They are wrong, perhaps, the adults who insist that motive is everything. War has a way of teaching that outcomes leave the deeper scars. Pattern interrupt. Imagine third year restructured entirely. No Patronus as a symbol of innocent light, but a life-draining variant that rips warmth from Dementors and bystanders alike, turning Quidditch stands into a frost-bitten halo around Harry's broom. Or a fifth year where he accepts Voldemort's offer, embeds himself within the inner circle, and becomes tactically lethal as a double agent, feeding both sides just enough truth to keep the war burning at a sustainable temperature. If you want to walk further into those corridors, if you want Hogwarts to remain less a school and more a fortress crucible, where every lesson is a weapons test. Signal it. Like this video so the algorithm keeps the doors open. Subscribe so you do not miss the next fracture in the timeline. Share it with the friend who believes Harry Potter's story is already decided, and invite them to help redraw the battle lines. Because in every universe, Harry Potter walks into Hogwarts carrying a scar and a lifetime of pain. The difference between Saviour and Shadow is rarely a prophecy. It is one book taken from the shelf, one mentor who stays 10 minutes longer, one spell whispered in the silence. Choose the year, choose the mentor, and remember, the next child who walks through those doors will not know which lesson you just rewrote for them.